Mostly stick to the script. First, I want to welcome you. Today is actually the first event of a year-long series of events to commemorate the 40th anniversary of services for students with disabilities on campus. So I couldn't be more pleased that you're here, and I hope that if you enjoy this talk, you will tell others about it and that you'll attend other events. There is a brochure that you can pick up on the way out for the other talks. And why I push them all, the one event I do want to sort of push even more is that this will all culminate in a one-day, all-day conference here in the gallery room. We will have a series of speakers both looking and remembering the past and sort of looking at the future, and hopefully it will be a wonderful event. So we hope that you're there, and it's free, and there'll be a luncheon served. So, along with the typical goodies of pens and memory sticks that you can pick up on the way out. And I couldn't be happier that the person that we have to kick off this event is our very own Jane Bayless-Vincent. Jane, as you know, as I refer to her, is our adaptive technology guru. So one of the nice things is, I just asked, this is the type of person Jane is. I said, can you just write a couple of bullet points about how you'd like me to introduce you? And she did more than that. She wrote her life story. And then not only that, but instead of allowing me to ad-lib a joke, she wrote her own joke in her own introduction. So how can I perfect on that? Jane Bayless-Vincent is a 1986 graduate of what is now the University of Michigan School of Information, where she first became fascinated by the connection between assistive computing technology and the empowerment of people with disabilities. After 3 years in Madison, Wisconsin, and 20 years in Berkeley, California, working on technology accessibility, she decided to return home to Ann Arbor in 2011. And even the polar vortex has failed to sway her belief that this was the ideal move. As Assistant Technology Manager for the University of Michigan, she works with students to address access needs. She assists Scott Williams with web accessibility reviews and serves on several committees to raise awareness of accessibility at the University of Michigan and in academia at large. She is the author of 2 books for librarians, Implementing Cost Accessibility at U of M. She is the co-author of 2 books for librarians, Implementing Cost-Effective Assisted Computer Technology, and the forthcoming book, Making the Library Accessible for All. And when is that due out? April 2014. So she will be selling signed copies at that point. Again, she is honored to be the first speaker in the 2014 series commemorating the 40th anniversary of services for students with disabilities. I give you Jane Bayless-Vincent, and thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Stuart. Presentation today is called One Simple Question, or You Walked 4 Miles to Eat What? And you walked 4 miles to eat what is not the simple question. But the presentation is about the history of assistive technology, but even more, it's about the people who made it happen here at the University of Michigan. And for those of you who were around at the time, who would like to add information or correct information or just know really good jokes, please feel free to chime in. So I want to start by taking you back to the University of Michigan in the mid-1980s. Who here was around then? Okay. Back then, we had just a few computer labs. Most of them were fairly small. We had no mobile devices. This is what Microsoft Word looked like. It was running off MS-DOS on the Windows side. When I was using computers as part of my grad work over at what was then the School of Library Science, we had Apple IIs that did not have hard drives, did not have floppy drives. No, we ran our programs off of cassette tapes. Macs were around, but they were a popular novelty. The first Macs had no hard drives. You had to do what a friend of mine, in his politer moments, called making toast. You could type about 8 pages of a document, and then you had to switch out your floppy drives. So not a great deal of storage. There was no internet as we know it. Instead, what you would do is you would turn on your computer and you would get a prompt 364 days of the year. The prompt would say which host. On Halloween, of course, it would say which ghost. That's on the technology side. On the legislation side, there was no Americans with Disabilities Act. There was no Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act saying that entities who were covered by the Rehabilitation Act, including those receiving federal funds, had to make their technology accessible. What there was an obligatory computer fee. I believe it was about $100 per semester. In those days, $100 meant a lot more than it did now. And you couldn't get out of it. It was charged to every student who was here, undergrad and grad. And there was a blind graduate student in the School of Social Work named Doug Thompson. And Doug Thompson asked one simple question. Why do I have to pay these fees when there's no equipment I can use? And at the time, according to an article that we published in 1990, at the time there actually was some adaptive equipment on campus, but there were no provisions to advertise its availability or to provide user support or to maintain the equipment. So the equipment was there, but it was pretty badly broken down and in need of repair. So I suspect that Doug went around asking that question to an awful lot of people, but he finally asked it to the right person, who was a staff member named Jim Knox. And the facts about Jim outside his assistive technology work: he bled maize and blue. He had a bachelor's degree from the School of Natural Resources, a master's degree from the School of Public Health, and he did some work in the PhD program in urban and regional planning. He co-authored a paper on the first computer-oriented GIS system and was afterwards invited to teach at Harvard, but he stayed in Ann Arbor. He served as a long-term consultant at the Computing Center and eventually became co-manager of the group. He served as a postmaster and ombudsman on the university's user advocate team, helping to educate the university about proper use of information, protecting users against abuse, and handling abuse complaints. What that doesn't say about Jim was that Jim did absolutely nothing halfway. He had a lot of passions: assistive technology, good food, nature, music, especially socializing. And that's Jim about the time I met him, 1986. And one of the things that consistently happens today is I'm talking to somebody who knew Jim, and nobody ever says, oh, I was an acquaintance of Jim's, or I was a friend of Jim's. Everybody says, oh yeah, I was a good friend of Jim's, or I was a close friend of Jim's. And he had an unbelievable knack of making everybody feel that way. And I want to take just a second and acknowledge Jim's best friend who's here today, Roberta Knox. I will at the end. Thank you. So the first thing that Jim and Doug did together is they started the Blind Computer Users Group, or BUG. They started that in June of 1986. They invited a number of students who were blind or had low vision to join them. At that time, there was no audio component on the internet, so deaf and hard of hearing students weren't really running into much in the way of accessibility issues. The mouse was available on the Macs, but not on the PCs, so people who would have difficulty using a mouse tended to gravitate toward the PCs. And there really, at that point, wasn't an appreciation of how technology could accommodate people with learning disabilities or other cognitive needs. So that really wasn't coming up in the discussions. So with this group put together, they had students, they had a purpose. What they needed was a library science graduate with an interest in accessibility and a really cheesy haircut. I started working for the university in 1982. In this room, I believe my desk was probably where the exhibits are right now. This used to be a cataloging department of the library. About 1984, I moved to Mathematical Reviews, which was in the 611 Church Street building. After Math Reviews moved out of there, coincidentally, Jim Knox and his group moved in. But at that point, I was still kind of flailing around trying to find my niche in the world. And I graduated from the School of Library Science in 1986 with an interest in accessibility services and realized that if I was interested in working with people with disabilities, it would help to actually meet some. So I signed up with the SSD office as a volunteer, and one of my clients was a woman named Melanie. And Melanie was an African-American woman who had low vision due to albinism and diabetes, and she needed someone to read her text to her. And so I would go over there usually once or twice a week and just read to her. And it was as much an education for me, I think, as for her, not only in terms of disability, but in terms, one story in particular, in terms of racism. She told me about one time in Detroit where she had had a drop in her blood sugar and passed out, came to in the hospital where the orderlies, where the interns actually were betting each other a pizza as to what type of drug she was on. And that's still horrifying to me to that day. But the biggest gift that she gave me was that at one point I happened to mention that I was interested in assistive technology. And she said, well, there's this guy named Doug Thompson, and he's starting this group for students, and you should really contact him. So I did, and Doug invited me to dinner. And I went over to his place. He was living, I believe, in Northwood. And his stepson opened the door. The stepson had a rat about the size of Baltimore on his shoulder. And I got to meet Doug. I got to meet his wife, Brenda. Sorry. And Doug said, well, what would you like for dinner? We're going to order from Subway. And by the way, I invited a staff member named Jim Knox to come over. So that's how I met Jim. The three of us started talking. And I realized that this was the group of people that I wanted to work with here at the university. So the first thing we did together was to put together a white paper that we published in October of '86. And this was ahead of its time. It was asking for equipment at Central and North Campus. It was asking for accessible documentation to be available in recorded, Braille, and large print form. It was asking for support staff. It said an attempt should be made to allow blind students to participate in IDT courses. I believe IDT was the name then for what is now ITS. John, is that? Yes, thank you, Patricia. That there should be statewide sharing of accessible documentation, that there should be a relationship with state agencies, and there should be inter-university cooperation. And the second thing that we did, the BUG would meet once a month, and my notes show that in November, we expanded the focus and changed the name to the Disabled Computer Users Group, or DUG. Possibly not a coincidence. My notes also show that at the November 10th meeting, there was a demonstration of a PC-compatible computer with 2 drives and an Arctic voice synthesizer. This synthesizer can support 5 different voices. Now, my assumption is at that point there were probably only voices that would handle English. At that point, there was probably no international language support. But one thing I did when I was putting this together is I thought it would be interesting to look at a price comparison between the technology and the types of technology and the cost of technology in 1987 versus 2013. And a screen reader for DOS in 1987, which didn't have to do nearly as much as a screen reader for a GUI-based system has to do. The PC talking program was $500. On the PC today, JAWS, which is the highest end screen reader, is $900 and up, but it's far more sophisticated than the PC talking program was. If you only need to access word processing and a browser and very basic programs, you can get an open source screen reader called NVDA that uses many of the same commands that JAWS does for $0 because it's open source. And by the way, we now have NVDA running on all our PC Sites all our PC Sites computers. If you have a Mac, you can use VoiceOver, which is built into the Mac and built in as well into all the iOS devices, and that also costs $0. You used to also have to purchase synthesis hardware to get your computer to talk. And the high end of that was something called a Deck Talk, $1,600. It had about 9 voices called Perfect Paul and Huge Harry and Kit the Kid, and very, very high quality. Even by today's standards, they were pretty high quality. If you wanted something a little less pricey, you could get a program called Symphonic, along with a Symphonic card, along with Arctic Vision software for $695. Again, today, the same capability costs you nothing because the focus is no longer on hardware synthesis, it's on software synthesis already built into the screen readers. And a third point of comparison is magnification software. For DOS, magnification software cost $2,695. Today, the program that we run on our sites computers, Magic, is $395 without speech, $595 with speech. So the capabilities have gone way up and the cost has gone way down. So, yes, yeah. So, which makes it even more dramatic. Patricia? Oh, please say hi to Ronti for me. Ronti is a fabulous accessibility expert at MSU. So just down the street. So tell her she's just down the street. She should come here one of these days. Thank you. At our February 1987 meeting, first of all, members were encouraged to think of a better name than Disabled Computer Users Group. And we had a presentation from Harold Abraham. And Harold was a vendor in the assistive technology world. He's still around. He's still local. I tried to reach him to see if he could make it to this presentation. He most recently worked for Guide Dogs. And he said 2 very interesting things at that presentation. One is that outside the field of computer development for people with disabilities, optical character recognition is developing quickly, even though the Kurzweil is still the only existing machine. And the Kurzweil he was referring to is a machine called the Reading Edge, and we actually still have it at the Knox Center. The Reading Edge, unlike most modern scanners, does not scan directly into a computer. What it does is it reads reasonably good quality print materials and then speaks it aloud on the fly. So if you don't need to manipulate text, if you just want to hear what's going on, you can use the Reading Edge. And I actually even still get some inquiries for it, for people who don't need to use a computer or don't want to use a computer. It's a good solution if you just need to listen to something once. The other thing that Harold said, which was very interesting, is that voice input technology is mostly being developed outside the arena of disabled-oriented technology. And that's true, and that's still true today. Voice recognition companies often pay a lot of lip service to accessibility, but really they're not putting the efforts in the development that they could if they really wanted to reach the accessibility market. So even then, we were starting to see a lot of the technologies that are very, very common now. In March 1987, motions were made and carried to change the group name to the Barrier-Free Computer Users Group, or BFCUG, which was the name that stuck, finally. There were two other accessibility groups that developed at this time. One was called Signs of the Times, which was active as of spring 1987. And I was actually a member of this. It was Joni Smith's sign language classes. So the people who were interested in learning to sign could come in and get a basic vocabulary. There was also a coalition of students with disabilities. The description was, students from this group serve on key university committees, represent the group before local and state government, and serve as advocates to assist all individuals maintaining equity and independence, and also serves the social needs of its members by sponsoring special trips and events through the year. So organizations such as the two councils that Stewart sponsors, the group that Lloyd Shelton is developing, and so forth, have a long and proud history here at the university in terms of students self-advocating. Around June 1987, there was a proposal submitted to the Michigan Commission for the Blind. And this was to get the first actual accessible computer labs going. Our current design concept is to establish two blind workstation centers on campus, one at the undergraduate library terminal station and the other at the computing center on North Campus. We also propose the acquisition of low-cost, easily transportable hardware and software, which could be moved to any of the new sites, such as the residence halls, which are now being established on campus. And the grant requests were for 2 each of speech synthesizers. We were still dependent on the speech synthesizer hardware at that point. 2 screen readers, 2 braille printers, 2 magnification programs, and 2 large print monitors. At that point, the cost was there's one too many zeros in there, would have been $24,000. I thought about, it kind of costed the same setup in my head this morning, and I think it would come out to about $8,000 today, and the bulk of that would be the 2 braille printers. Braille printers are still pretty expensive. The one we got last year, I think, is about in the $2,200 range, but most of the rest of this technology, including the large print monitors, have come down significantly. With Jim's prescience, usual prescience, in fact. One of the things that he also said in the grant was that we are not far from the time when a knowledge of computers will be required for graduation, which is a bit of an understatement, actually. But the lab was funded, and the low vision room was established on the 4th floor of the undergraduate library, or the ugly, and it was, back then it really was. It has become quite an elegant building since, but back then it was quite the place. It was a joy to work with Doug, but Doug was a character, and Doug was determined to make sure that this was going to happen. I remember one night in particular where he called me 5 times straight in a row. And he believed in this so thoroughly, not only for himself, but for other students, that he inspired a lot of people. The membership of BFCUG just kept growing and growing as more people saw the vision, saw how this could be useful for themselves, saw how this could be useful for others, and really came on board. About that time, after 14 months, SSD finally acquired a director, a woman named Darlis Top, later Darlis Vanderbeek. And that picture doesn't begin to do her justice. She was a very lovely lady. She had had one leg amputated when she was a teen, I believe. And she started on December 3rd, 1986. And the SSD office then was not the SSD office that it is now. Per a 1988 Michigan Daily article, the office, located in a remote section of the Michigan Union, consists of 2 small rooms with heavy doors and non-modular furniture, features which prevent even Vanderbeek, who is disabled herself, from entering her own office without difficulty. And if I remember correctly, the hallway was probably not as wide as this podium. And that was a problem for wheelchairs. It was a bigger problem for dogs, because dogs could not pass each other and would therefore be at each other's throats. So fortunately, around the time of that 1988 article, funding was found to move the SSD office to its current and very lovely and very accessible location. Mm-hmm. So, where?
Where the flower gardens are now.
Okay. Okay, so where you are now is not where?
Exactly.
Okay.
Very close.
Okay. Not quite as often a participant in those dog fights was Dar's own border collie, who understood American Sign Language. Dar would sign to the dog, and the dog would respond. Very smart dog, and completely devoted to Dar. In fact, Dar tried to get puppies from the dog, and the vet had to explain to her that no, the dog thinks you're her mate, and therefore give it up. And Dar and Doug became very, very good friends. Doug at that point was in the hospital quite a bit. He had, as often unfortunately happens with diabetics, he had first had a toe amputated and then a leg amputated. And Brenda, Doug's wife, got a little jealous, but I don't think there was really anything of that type going on between them. They were just 2 people who understood accessibility and had a passion for implementing it. And Dar and I became good friends as well, and one thing that I remember very clearly was that I once had a communication with Dar where she shared some very personal information with me, and I was completely shocked. And it wasn't the nature of the information that shocked me. It was how she delivered the information. She sent the information to me by email. And this was when email was still rather on the impersonal side. This was before Twitter and Facebook and the days where people would post their most intimate thoughts or their most intimate breakfast menu to the world. And so I remember, now email feels more intimate and more personal, but back then I just remember being shocked and thinking, this is kind of a new direction. This is kind of a new world that we're moving at with technology, where email is now what we use to communicate personal things to personal friends. After Dar left, Julie Biernat, who had been Dar's assistant, took over the SSD office. And I'm not sure, she may have been there until Sam started. I don't think she was there for too long, but...
No, Sam took over. I mean, Sam was there, came a year after Sam came.
Okay.
And Julie was not part of the office.
Okay. So at the end of 1987, reluctantly, I left the University of Michigan. I moved to Madison and got work at the Trace Center, which is a nationwide research center on assistive technology. And I came in very starry-eyed about, technology can help people with disabilities do things that they were never able to do before. And my first lesson from Greg was, that's very nice. The real issue is that technology is developing so fast and becoming so ubiquitous that if we don't make sure that it's accessible, people with disabilities are going to be left even further behind. So I was at the Trace Center for probably about 4 months, and the phone rings, and it's Jim. And it's Jim letting me know that Doug had passed away. And one of the things that happened at that point was there was the establishment of the Thompson Fund. The Thompson Fund had funds earmarked for the purchase of adaptive computer technology. And the idea was that this was not going to be just something that would serve identified individuals, but that would provide some opportunities for experimentation with the technology that was acquired. And Doug's legacy continued. The next president of the barrier-free group was John Warner. John was a legally blind PhD candidate in statistics. And according to a 1990 Michigan Daily article, to those who question the feasibility of buying expensive special equipment for a handful of people, Warner answers that such purchases might eventually increase the number of enrolled students with disabilities, which I believe has happened. Yeah. The vice president of BFCUG at the time was Ray Farha. And Ray was a data manager at the Center for Political Studies. And Ray used a piece of technology called an Opticon. And the Opticon has pretty much disappeared from the market. Yeah. Well, for a lot of purposes, it was actually rather useful. The Opticon kind of looked like a mouse, but it had one braille cell in the middle. And you would run it over a sheet of paper, and it would translate whatever letter was under your finger into braille. And it certainly wasn't fast, but it did give you direct access to print, especially at a time before optical character recognition had become ubiquitous. So there have been a lot of experiments in braille mice ever since. None of which have really gotten off the ground, but it's an interesting example of something that had a niche for a while and then disappeared absolutely completely. And Ray was interviewed for a 1989 Michigan Daily article in conjunction with the EDUCOM conference, which I'll talk about in a moment. And he said, "The thing I like least about computers is that they aren't smart. They're not supposed to make mistakes, but they do. I've caught them." We also had a number of other supporters, and I want to particularly call out Lisa Bartlett. Lisa couldn't be here today, but she's a graphic designer. She's now the head of the graphic shop at the Union. And one thing that she had been interested in for a long time, and she's still interested in doing this, is using silk screening to produce braille, so that there's potential of not having to go through braille printers, which are expensive and noisy and can take a while. Sorry? And noisy. But is interested in exploring alternative strategies. So it is, being back, it has been lovely reconnecting with Lisa. In 1990, Lisa, Jim, Ray, and myself put together an article for Closing the Gap. Closing the Gap is a major nationwide, actually international initiative on assistive technology, and had the article published in their newsletter, and we're also invited to do a presentation at their annual conference about the experience of implementing assistive technology at the University of Michigan. Jim was unable to attend, so I actually ended up giving the presentation. In 1992, the next generation came along. There was a new student with accessibility needs in the law school. And Jack and Jim became very fast friends. And two reminiscences of Jack's. Unfortunately, he was unable to be here today, but I know you're watching the video, Jack. In a 1997 article, he said, the lab wasn't much to look at, but it provided me with access to a $5,000 monitor that I could have never afforded to own. I was actually in a meeting with Jack this week, and he started reminiscing about when he was at the computer lab on the 4th floor in the middle of the undergraduate library renovation. And the lab was literally exposed to the elements during the winter. And Jack just went out, ordered a pizza, picked up the pizza from the ground floor, took it up to the lab, and kept studying. But it did certainly motivate Jack and Jim to look at a renovation of the accessible lab. And Jack sent out an email in June of 1994. My name is Jack Biernat. I am president of the Barrier-Free Computer Users Group at the University of Michigan and involved in designing a new adaptive technology computing site in our university library. In an effort to produce the most versatile, functional, effective site possible, we hope to learn from you, our colleagues around the country. We would appreciate a brief reply from anyone who works with adaptive tech. We are particularly interested in hearing from those of you who have adaptive tech sites and would be willing to let us contact you in the future. And I don't know if you ever heard back from anybody, but the renovation went forward in 1997. And it was a partnership between BFCUG, between Herman Miller, which is an office furniture manufacturer in Zeeland, and Sam Gooden, who by then was the head of SSD. And the computer lab moved to the basement of the Ugly, and that's pretty much what it looked like. You can see that there were more students with physical disabilities as well as those with visual disabilities at that time. There were 9 ergonomically designed workstations with motorized adjustable height work surfaces, adjustable seating, and full monitor positioning capabilities. Each station is double-sized to accommodate a human and a canine companion. The lab also includes soundproof partitions that allow students with attention deficit disorders or learning disabilities to work without distraction. So at that time, there was an acknowledgement that accommodations for students with learning disabilities and ADD were also necessary along with the other accommodations that had been provided for some time. And Jack, I sent him an email earlier this week and I said, can you tell me when BFCUG disbanded and why? He said he was succeeded as president by Mike Myatt, and Mike was instrumental in the establishment of UMinds, which is the university's disability studies program. And BFCUG, after Mike left, just kind of faded around 2000. One thing where BFCUG representatives were tremendously critical was something called Project Easy. Project Easy started as a project of EDUCOM. EDUCOM is an initiative on technology in the post-secondary environment. And it started in 1988. And by chance, I went to, there's a major assistive technology conference in Southern California every year called CSUN. And by chance, I went to CSUN in 1989, ended up sitting next to Krista Kramer, who was one of the founders of Project Easy. And she invited me to a meeting at the University of Oregon. And of course, I called Jim and said, you want to come and meet up with us there? And of course, he said yes. And that first meeting in particular highlighted the Michigan difference. Durola Hockley from Missouri was there, Jay Brill from Maryland, Danny Hilton-Cholfin from UCLA. We were later joined by Norm Coombs from the Rochester Institute of Technology, Cheryl Bergstaller from the University of Washington, and so forth. And there was one thing that the other universities had in common that we didn't. And at every other university, the initiative for assistive technology was started from within the staff. And at Michigan, the initiative had been started and was continually being fed by the students. And I've always been tremendously proud of that. I would love to see that spark again. That's less true today than it used to be. But that's really the kernel of where things started here at the university, and really, I think, has informed a tremendously powerful program. So for many years, the Project EASY group met at Snowmass, Colorado at EDUCOM's annual meeting. We would work through breakfast, we would work through lunch, we would break for dinner, we would get into our bathing suits, we would find the nearest hot tub, and that's when our real discussions began. And we got a tremendous amount of work done. We put together a tremendous amount of information that could be shared with other universities, and EASY really became acknowledged as the post-secondary resource on assistive technology. And one night, where we were not going to meet up after dinner, Jim finds out about a restaurant called, I believe, Krablunik. And he's totally game to go to this. And Krablunik serves elk and wild boar, and I believe at that time, possibly ostrich. And it was a 4-mile walk. And I was a vegetarian at the time. I don't know if I could have made 4 miles anyway, let alone for a restaurant where I couldn't eat anything. But Jim was determined to do it, and by gum, 4 miles over, 4 miles back, and he loved it. So one of the other things that EASY decided to do was to print and sell T-shirts. And I believe for a time, Roberta, you guys had about, what, 300 of these in your basement? Some number similar to that. But the T-shirt on the back, which I will happily show you after the presentation, has a quote from someone named Richard Reed that says, "Our first belief is that disability is a relational concept. It does not reside within an individual. Our second belief is that electronic technology can alter environments in such a manner as to allow people who have various functional deficits to operate without any disability whatsoever." And Patricia, let me know if you need another angle. And that might be in the light of disability studies and thought about disability that has come since. That might be controversial, but for its time, that was a pretty advanced thought. The EDUCOM conference, an annual EDUCOM conference, occurred at the University of Michigan in 1989. Jim coordinated it. It began on October 17th. I remember that because, of course, the first thing we did when we got to Ann Arbor was we all found the hot tub at the hotel. And someone came running down and told us about the Loma Prieta earthquake. But there were several accessibility-related presentations. All of which were very well attended, very interesting, and Jim and Roberta very kindly hosted us at their house. It was one of the last opportunities that we all got together, but it was a tremendous experience. And Project EASY is still around. It's still tremendously important and very active. It has expanded its focus beyond just post-secondary education into K-12 as well. They give webinars on accessible web design, a number of other topics. The university does have a subscription, so if anybody's interested in a Project EASY webinar, we can usually see it at no charge. So as time went on, Jim got involved in at least 3 other projects. One in 2004 were the Ergopods. Jim worked with, looking for his name, with a Jeff Vandenbosch, who was a graduate, to create a workstation that would be as flexible and as accessible to as many people as possible. It was a sit-stand recline workstation giving unimpeded access to computers and peripheral equipment. Each Ergopod, which is 62 inches wide, 35 inches deep, and 67 inches high, is equipped with a height-adjustable work surface, computers for Mac and PC users, keyboard, closed-circuit television, and scanner. We've attempted to take everything we have learned over the years and build it into a single workstation, says Jim Knox, who oversees the Adaptive Technology Computing site, and first conceptualized the Ergopods. Disability has come to encompass repetitive stress injuries and learning disabilities, as well as blindness, deafness, and mobility impairment. We expect the Ergopods to accommodate individuals with these disabilities. Students, faculty, and staff with disabilities previously visited ATCS and Shapiro Undergraduate Library for specialized computer access. Now this access will be available throughout campus, fulfilling the university's long-term goal. There were 15 Ergopods. This one happens to be over in the Duderstadt. There is, as of today, there is still one available in the law library. The Ergopods were a wonderful concept. Unfortunately, they proved hard to maintain. They have been replaced by 40-plus adjustable tables, which are currently being rolled out across campus, including several here in the Shapiro and Hatcher libraries. So that will be an opportunity, especially as we move toward more of a bring-your-own-device environment, for people to be able to get the adjustable tables that they need. Second thing that Jim was involved with was talking points, which was called an urban orientation system. Described in a 2006 paper, the primary goal of the talking point system is to associate digital information with places and objects in an accessible way, creating a type of augmented reality. The simplest piece of information is a description of the place or object in a format that can be read aloud to a user. However, the system is designed to be easy to extend, so a point could also contain a longitude, latitude, and altitude, information about nearby points, and dynamic information such as the current exhibits at a museum, a room's meeting schedule, or upcoming events at a theater. So basically what the picture here is showing is that somebody who has a Bluetooth system or has a device that could pick up the talking points tag would be able to walk by, say, Espresso Kingdom, and hear that Espresso Kingdom serves coffee and tea open from 6 a.m. The potential is there to have reviews of the place, so that somebody could say, you really don't want to come here. The initial experiments were with RFID tags, then there were experiments with Bluetooth. National papers were presented in 2006, 2008. The project is on hold, but there are people who are very interested in reviving it, and we get together from time to time. We're still trying to figure out what the best technical options might be, but it's something that in the long run has huge potentials, not just for accessibility purposes, but for communicating information in general. And finally, a very simple, but again, a project that had a lot of impact was a blind person came into the university club and said, I would like a Braille menu. And the University Club didn't have a Braille menu at that time, so they approached Carol Dobritsky. Carol approached Jim, and he was very quickly able to produce a Braille menu that the University Club was able to provide to patrons on request. So something that was very easy to produce, but that had the potential for a huge impact. And Jim became a very sought-out expert on assistive technology in higher education. He wrote an article that was published in the 1993 issue of Library High Tech. Harry Murphy, who is the person who started the CSUN conferences, interviewed Jim, among other people, as an expert on assistive technology. He and I stayed in close touch. In 1997, I pressed him into avuncular duties to walk me down the aisle at my wedding. I wouldn't give you much for the marriage, but the wedding was wonderful. And these are the only pictures that I have of myself with Jim. I visited Ann Arbor again. I didn't come back as much as I would have liked, but I came back in 2001. Jim brought me back to present in around 2004 as the new, what is now North Quad was being developed to discuss accessibility in the design. The lab was moved from the basement to the first floor, where it currently is, but not for long, within the Shapiro Library. Jim called me very excited in 2009 to let me know that there was now a web accessibility position within the university. Then and now filled by Scott Williams in the Office of Institutional Equity. Around the end of 2009, beginning of 2010, he sent me an email saying, what should the new name for the ATCS be? Should we continue to call it assistive? Should we call it accessible? How do we rename it? And no decision at that time was made. And in April 2010, beginning of April, I was sitting at home on a Sunday, and I had a feeling that something was wrong. I had a feeling that I was about to lose somebody I cared about very much. And for somehow I knew who it was. And we exchanged a couple of more emails, and we lost Jim on July 4th, 2010. Someone, I forget who, said that it was rather appropriate that he go out with fireworks. In 2010, the decision was made to rename the correct name, the name that the lab should have had all along, was renamed as the James Edward Knox Assistive Technology Computing Site. And there was a wonderful ceremony, including food, inevitably. Roberta spoke, Paul Carant spoke. It was really exquisite. But before the ceremony started, I remember going up to the nameplate that had just been installed with Jim's name on it. And the plate has about 4 knobs on it. And I remember going up to it and just touching and holding on to one knob. And I remember Jack coming up and touching another one. And I felt like that was our way of promising Jim that no matter what happened, that his work would go on. And still, every time, the first time I go to the Knox Center in the morning, I come by and I touch that knob to remember in part why I do what I do. I've been very lucky to be able to be in this position and to continue the work. In 2014, I would say there's an enhanced awareness. The number of students has risen astronomically in terms of students registered with the SSD office. The amount and availability of assistive technology that's provided at the University of Michigan, thanks to sites, has exploded. We are currently redesigning the Knox Center to move to the 2nd floor. It will be about 3 times the current size. There will be a room where people can close the door and use voice recognition technology without interrupting anybody else. There will also be a policy of quiet, because that's the one thing that all students have asked me for, is whether or not they need it as an accommodation, is that the computer lab be quiet to allow them to work. There are a tremendous number of people involved with this on campus, but I want to call out two in particular. One is Laura Patterson, who is the CIO of the University of Michigan, who has made it very clear, both on her website and in her actions, that she sees accessibility as a priority. One thing that I'm very, very proud of is that we were on a conference call with Google, and Google was saying, well, you know, we talked to a lot of universities, and every other university asks us, what do we have to do to be legally compliant? And the University of Michigan is really interested in what can we do to be accessible. And I'm very proud of that. The other person I want to call out, who is here today, is Rich Wong, who is now the head of, I should know this off the top of my head, of support services for.
My official title is Consumer Technology Experience, whatever that means.
Thank you. But I'm very fortunate to have Rich as my boss, and he has shown just a amazing both willingness and aptitude in the few months that he's been here to appreciate the need for accessibility and to seek out where accessibility may be an issue. Thank you. Well, we'll see what happens when it's actually bonus time. So I want to close out with kudos, as is only appropriate. ITS, of course, is my primary family on the university campus, but SSD is a close second. And I tried to come up with appropriate words and was not able to, but I would simply like to acknowledge Stuart, Mary, Jill, Dan, the folks who aren't here, Maureen, Fred, Virginia. Sorry?
Slackers. Slackers.
Okay. And thank you for the amazing work that you do, and congratulate you in your 40th year. And we've got about 20 minutes if anyone has questions or comments or. Okay, then in that case, I'm going to suggest socialization. And thank you very much.
And before we break up, I have something.
Oh, Stuart.
A new car.
She's dreaming.
Yeah, and I don't drive.
Just a little gift and a token.
Thank you.
We're very appreciative.
Thank you.
And we consider you one of the SSD staff, so. I just also want to say two other things that I should have today, but I didn't want to forget. And that is the people who made it possible for us to have this room, because they are being very generous with their time and the equipment that they're doing, and I wanted to recognize them, both Marcia Bailey and Paul Barrow, who helped to make this possible. And one last thing, there are refreshments. Do not go home without either eating something or taking something home with you. So,
Stuart, one other thing.
yes,
Where can I come to a presentation in February?
you can come to a presentation in February in this very room.
February 5th.
February 5th,
Quick, look at the notes.
10 a.m.
10 a.m. That presentation is actually going to be a panel. It is, anybody can come, but it is aimed more for students, graduate and undergraduate students. It'll be a panel on employment issues. And we'll have representatives there from the Career Center, from the Office of Institutional Equity, and from, again, SSD. So, Jill, anything else you wanted to add to that? But there are flowers.
flowers?
That's it, make fun of my speech impediment. There are flyers in the back announcing all the talks throughout the year. And there's still some dates to be determined. One thing that I can tell you about that we're hoping to get scheduled, that's not that I'm sort of excited about, is that there was a student at the University of Michigan, his name was Christopher Rush. I don't know whether he was involved with your group or not.
I never met him.
Christopher had muscular dystrophy. When it was diagnosed back in the early 80s, it was said that he'd only last a year, and in fact, he lasted far beyond that. He graduated from U of M with honors, went on to Wayne State University, where he earned a law degree. He did pass away prior to his 30th birthday. His roommate was a guy by the name of Zachary Arnold. Zachary is a filmmaker in Los Angeles who has recently done a documentary on Chris's life and part of his times here at the University of Michigan. That movie is currently sort of being promoted, and one of the things we're hoping to do, I've been in contact with Zach, is to bring that film and show it as part of our 40th anniversary. So that the date for that has not been set, but that is in the works. So thank you. Have some coffee, some food. Talk to Jane. She's a wealth of knowledge, as you can see. And again, thank you, Jane, for this one.
Thank you.
Go far, that's the name. Oh, wait a minute. You were going to promote the Knox Fund.
Another.